everyone. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Charles P. Malone Podcasts. My name is Charles P. Malone, aka Chuck, and I will be your host for this book reading and commentary of my book, Winning Through Trial. Today's episode 13 covers chapter 7, and we're going to break it into halves again. And so today is the 7A, beginning on page 313. This chapter is titled, Be Mighty, the story of Mighty Jake. Oh, my good friends, this is such a touching chapter for me. Almost 22 years ago, a son to our youngest daughter was born with autism. He's actually our grandson. Later it was discovered that he also had an incurable disease affecting the body's energy source called mitochondria disease. The prognosis for Jacob living a full life was not positive. In fact, when he was not yet a teen, he was sent home to die, unplugged from his food source. And a recent discovery of a massive tumor in his chest, a ticking time bomb, no less. But here we are. Jake turns 22 years old next month. What? How, you say? Oh, you're going to love this final chapter of winning, because there is no one who embodies the teachings of this book any better than mighty Jake, despite the many trials he has endured. Chapter 7 begins on page 313, as I mentioned, and will end on page 339. In this chapter, we're going to feature what it means to be a hero. In fact, this entire book is dedicated to mighty Jake for proving that, well, doctors don't know everything. God has other purposes in mind. So no matter your prognosis, please don't give up hope. We know that God has plans for each of us. Winning way number 7 is choose to become mighty. And I want you to focus on the word choose. And it will be discussed in detail throughout this chapter. Jake's story is one in a million, so we must share much of this story. It is filled with so much hope. So without any further introduction, let's begin this amazing story of mighty Jake with a mighty quote from one of my favorite writers of all time, Og Mandino. And I quote, "Always do your best. What you plant now, you will harvest later." And a great scripture from the book of Psalms to introduce my grandson, mighty Jake. His seed shall be mighty upon the earth. Oh, don't you love that? Who would have thought, eh? Well, if you were to think of someone in your life who might fit the be mighty persona, who would that be? Mine would be Mighty Mouse, a cartoon mouse character created in the 1940s and found his way to the States during the mid-50s when I was around 11 years of age. Every Saturday morning before chores, I talked my mother into letting me watch Mighty Mouse cartoons where the always smiling Super Mouse put his superpowers to work fighting evil or saving the beautiful Pearl Pureheart from certain death. Mighty Mouse was considered a superhero. His superpowers included the ability to fly, fantastic strength, and invincibility. I loved to see him swoop in just as the cat villain had the canary in his mouth and throw multiple super punches under the cat's chin, freeing the bird to live another day. I loved to hear him sing as he flew down from somewhere in outer space. Here I come to save the day, or something like that, or how I dreamed that I too would save the day. My father was mighty. Woodrow Wilson Red Malone was a red-headed Irishman raised in a very no-nonsense home environment by a father he never spoke of, and a mother, my Mima, who was as religious as Billy Graham himself. Yet he rose to the top of every service organization he joined, presiding over the Worldwide Elks and the USA Volunteer Firemen's Association. He was a leader. My father was a businessman during the day and the local volunteer fire department chief at night, or whenever a fire broke out. He had the keys to the fire station, and the minute the phone rang, pulsating out the steady rings announcing a fire, he was out the door to the fire station, starting up the water tanker fire truck, while others arrived and donned their gear and firefighting equipment as the big engine roared to life, sirens screaming, "Get out of my way, I have work to do. I have come to save the day." I will never forget standing across the street from the local cleaners store as the black smoke and orange and red flames consumed the building in the middle of the block, with cleaners displayed over the front door, and seeing people scream and weep over the sight. And there was my dad, clothed with a helmet and gloves and a white t-shirt, encased in the jaws of hell, but spraying water for all he was worth to keep the fire from spreading to the other buildings. Unlike my favorite Saturday morning cartoons, Mighty Mouse did not swoosh down to save this day, but the heroes from the Holbrook Volunteer Fire Department did. Their heroic efforts against that fire-breathing beast saved most of the block, containing other businesses vital to the community, the Greyhound Bus Depot being one of them. On this eventful day many years ago, the mighty volunteers from Station 1 would indeed save the day, but not without incident. Among those injured in this battle between fire and water was Mighty Red, my father. His right arm, the recipient of a scalding bucket of cleaning solution, leaving a burned mass of flesh and a huge patch of arm never to grow hair again. My mother was also mighty. Dorothy, Dot, Leopold Malone, was home alone one late, hot afternoon when a rapid succession of loud banging at her front door broke the silence of the end of an otherwise peaceful Saturday. Both her husband and son were out of town. Dot was alone. Before my mother could get to the door and greet whoever was on the other side, the door burst open, and Sue from next door pushed past my mother, looking as if she had seen a ghost, or worse, being chased by one. Before Dot could react to Sue's uncharacteristic arrival, another figure burst through the door, Sue's husband. He was carrying a shotgun. Dot could not remember much after trying to restrain her attacker, grappling for the gun he held in his hands. But Dot was no match for the stocky Coca-Cola delivery man as he pushed her to the floor, and after a brief hesitation, with a double-barreled shotgun aimed directly at her, lying on the kitchen floor, he stepped over her in pursuit of his wife. The ear-ringing sound of the shotgun was all Dot heard before trying to stand, emotion overcoming her to the point of exhaustion. "I have to save Sue," she thought to herself, legs shaking as she pulled herself upright, only to look again into the two round, dark eyes of her neighbor's double-barreled shotgun. Dot heard pleading from somewhere in the kitchen. A voice, calm with reason, was speaking to this man, encouraging him to put the gun down and let her help Sue. It was Dot's own voice. The neighbor never took his eyes off my mother, not until he placed the gun barrel under his chin and pulled the trigger. It was instinctive. She would later explain her actions, never wanting to play the part of a failed hero, but only reacting out of love. This same love was demonstrated by my mother on my behalf growing up, time and time again, once fighting the surgeons of Phoenix Children's Hospital, who wanted to amputate my right arm after being horribly crushed and sustaining a compound fracture from a horse riding accident. I still have use of both original arms, using my two thumbs at this very minute to pound out another book while on a treadmill at the health club. Thank you so much, mighty Dot. It was also my mother who single-handedly ended our high school hazing tradition, better known as sports initiation. As a freshman, I had lettered varsity in football and was taken along with a few others out to a remote area and beaten, among other degrading exercises. When my mother examined the bruises and broken blood vessels all over my body administered by several oak paddles, she stormed the principal's office the next morning with fire in her eyes. And that was that. This was the same woman who grabbed for the shotgun before the killer of her friend could complete his mission, trying desperately to talk reason into him. She had to get to Sue and call an ambulance, but her efforts would fail again, resulting in the man pushing her to the floor again, with a gun pointing right at her head before turning it on himself and pulling the trigger. He would not be denied finishing the job. My mother insisted on cleaning her kitchen of skull remains by herself. She wept for Sue, having lost her life in my parents' bedroom. But my mighty mother would not let someone's choices drive her from the home she loved, our home. These were my parents. These are their stories. Yet it was not these heroic trials alone that made them mighty. They were both flawed individuals, as I am, and as you are. No, it was not their accomplishments that made them mighty, but rather their reaction to their imperfect nature when presented with trial, which earned them placement in the Be Mighty Hall of Fame. They often fell short, but always got back up to try again. My mother battled alcoholism, emphysema, throat cancer, depression, and larynx cancer. She felt betrayed and filled with self-doubt when her son joined another religious faith, and she felt deprived when she could not attend his wedding held in a Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saint temple reserved for its members, such as the Masonic temple my mother belonged to. Yet she loved me enough to put aside her initial feelings of disappointment and disapproval to make way for future feelings of pride and support. I would say that makes her mighty. My father married my mother for better or for worse, and took that promise literally. He was not a perfect man either, or either, however you want to say it. He was blemished by his father before him, his ways very much the same as his father's. But my father never deserted my mother during her worst days. He covered for her when her weakness overcame her. I could hear them arguing way into the night many nights. Life was, at times, difficult for them, but they hung on to one another instead of looking for a way out. He lost his job of 20 years when he was 40 due to a change of ownership at the Coca-Cola plant there in Holbrook. He'd started over in a different town, Tucson, Arizona, at 45 and worked until he retired at 70, finishing strong, more than appreciated. He was loved by so many. I would say that makes him mighty. Although the word mighty, as used as a noun in Scripture, infers power and strength. You could check that out in Samuel 23, verse 8. It is also used to describe the capability of man to do good, such as he performed mighty deeds and mighty works. In the case of my grandson Jacob Priestley, it meant all the above. Life as you had imagined it may not have turned out. Such is the story of mighty Jake. Jacob Thomas Priestley, aka Mighty Jake, was born in Mesa, Arizona on August 28, 2002. He was the first son of Thomas John Priestley and Brittany Camille Malone, my youngest child. Jacob's entry into this life was pretty normal. Remember his grandmother, Linda Johnson Malone? But it wasn't until a few years later that Jacob's energetic behavior began drawing longer looks. We thought Jake was just following after his grandfather's early age antics of needing to be leashed any time in public for fear he would run away or cause a disturbance for his overactive curiosity. His mother, Brittany, chuckles. Grandma Linda remembers. But in the way he ran drew our attention to the possibility that something wasn't right. Jake would run on his toes almost like a ballerina without the special shoes. As he aged, other actions he drew attention. Jake's inattention to learning activities became paramount. Jake was officially diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, when he was 4. The A word strikes terror into the hearts of loved ones, second only to the C word, because there is such a wide range of health possibilities and is distinguished by a wide variation of social, communication, and cyclical behaviors that are considered somewhat out of character for children. And then that you could find that in 14 early autism symptoms in young children if you wanted to Google that. Activebeat.com. That's their article. Jake also exhibited additional behavior signals, many noted in the reference article by Emily Lockhart for activebeat.com. Disconnection with others. Jake seemed distant, never quite connected to those around him as a child. His facial expressions didn't change much, happy or sad. It's important to keep in mind that autistic children are not disconnected emotionally themselves. They simply don't understand or pick up on social cues as efficiently or as quickly as other children. Emotional outbursts. I remember those. Jake did not like surprises or unfamiliar circumstances, and often reacted to show his displeasure with occasional outbursts, no matter where or who might be around. We could be in church, we could be at the zoo, it wouldn't matter. Thankfully, his underlying nature kept those to a minimum and never took on an aggressive manner. As Jake matured, his amazing smile in the face of such a bleak future endeared people worldwide to him. Then there was delayed language development. By 3 years of age, most infants start to babble or mimic the language of those they interact with, pronouncing a single word when they point to an object to try to get their parents' attention. However, infants with autism may not start to babble or speak until much later. Some won't display significant language skills until they start working with a speech therapist. Jake didn't say a word until he was about 4, Jake's mom remembered. We then put him into a preschool with a speech therapist, and within a year he was saying 2 3-word sentences. Difficulty understanding figurative expressions is another. They may not also detect communication cues delivered through tone of voice. For example, they can't distinguish a happy tone of voice from a sad or angry one. And unlike children following standard development paths, they don't develop the ability to identify sarcasm or understand body language. A related symptom is that autistic children tend to have more trouble distinguishing between what's real and what is make-believe. While most, if not all, children have active imaginations, boy, I sure did, my mother said, and can't differentiate between fact and fiction the way older children and adults can. For autistic children, there seems to be, or seems to often be, no line at all between what's real and what's imagined. Repetitive behaviors. Individuals with autism are somewhat prone to repetitive behaviors. Um, they may arrange and rearrange the same group of objects. They may rock back and forth for extended periods of time, flutter their hands, or repeat the same word or phrase in what appears to be an obsessive manner. This is one of the most easily identifiable symptoms of autism, and it's one most parents will be on the lookout for early in the child's development. Another is sensitivity to external stimuli. Sensitivity to external stimuli is another early warning sign of autism. For example, autistic individuals may become stressed or agitated when exposed to specific noises, bright lights, smells, tastes, or textures. They may also become hypersensitive to certain stimuli. In other words, they will insist on wearing certain items of clothing or colors, prefer rooms with bright lights or loud sounds, and enjoy touching or playing with specific body parts. Many autistic children also display emotional stress when deprived of their preferred stimuli. Well, another is obsessive behavior. Children with autism will often show signs of inflexibility. This includes obsessive and repetitive behaviors. They will find one or a few activities they enjoy. Sometimes these activities are very unusual, and they will want to do them repeatedly throughout the day. Helpguide.org provides detailed examples of what these obsessive behaviors might include, especially as they age. For example, the need for a rigid routine might include taking the same route to school or church every day, in an ability to adapt to changes in schedule or environment, an unusual attachment to toys or strange objects, or becoming obsessed with a narrow topic of interest, usually something that involves numbers or symbols. They will enjoy repeating the same actions over and over again, spending long periods staring at moving objects like a ceiling fan, or instead of playing with a toy, they'll only focus on one aspect of it, like spinning the wheels on a toy car. Another sign, lack of communication. Healthychildren.org says that children with autism will also struggle with communication in a much more general sense. Not only will they be unable to speak or significantly delayed in their language development, but they might also seem utterly uninterested in communicating at all. As a result, they will not show any interest in sparking conversation or be able to participate in even a simple conversation. They will not respond to facial expressions. They won't use them. They won't notice when their name is being called, or even point at things when they need something. When they do start speaking, their language is often underdeveloped. For example, they might confuse their pronouns and use you when they should be saying I, and vice versa. Or repeat sentences they hear without understanding the meaning behind them. Healthychildren.org says this is called parroting or echoing. Another indication, seemingly unresponsive. According to Autism Canada, signs of autism can begin as early as 12 to 24 months. While it is often hard to get a diagnosis before the age of 24 months, one of the best indicators of autism is the absence of expected behaviors. Many other signs on this list can't be recognized until the child is older, but a child's responsiveness can be tested while young. Another, they don't like being touched or cuddled, and this was one of Jake's. This behavior was evident in him. He did not like to be touched by anyone but his mother. However, I made it my goal to coax him into my arms every time I saw him, and eventually those long hugs between grandfather and grandson became something Jake looked forward to, thus allowing me into the ring of hug honor. Oh, it can be devastating for a parent to learn something is wrong with their child. But luckily, with autism, an early diagnosis, ideally about 18 months, can make a huge difference. Once a baby past its infancy stage, parents might begin to notice their child does not like to be touched or cuddled as a typically developing child would. Autism Canada also notes that children with autism will not like to be touched, making it hard to console them during emotional outbursts or tantrums, especially when young. It can affect their ability to bond with parents and siblings, or even make friends with other children. Autism is commonly characterized as a mental condition that affects communication and behavior, which is present from an early age. Several medical theories exist about autism, some more backed by science than others. For example, some celebrities caused a false buzz by stating the condition is caused by vaccines. Although Jake's autism was less severe than the highly impacted, he still carried many of the symptoms noted above. These symptoms would only exacerbate once he started formal education. Jake's behavior problems soon became a challenge for his parents and teachers, and one by one they threw up their hands and requested that Jake be sent on to one program after another until there were no more. At the age of 8, mighty Jake left the school system to be homeschooled by his mother. Around the age of 9, Jake started having bowel elimination problems, resulting in extended hospital stays of 1 or 2 week periods to clean out his colon and feed him nutrients. The doctors poked and prodded and conducted test after test without diagnosing the root of the problem, only to send Jake home feeling better until he returned a few weeks later with the same problem. Jake's mom would not leave his bedside for one moment, quizzing every doctor or nurse who attended Jake to learn as much as she could about his care. She soon realized these medical professionals had no clue what was wrong with her son. They gathered facts and test results for months without a clear consensus about Jake's condition. Through a medical miracle and tender mercy from God, Jake's condition was noticed by a family and church friend who just happened to be a medical doctor. Have Jake's doctor run tests for mitochondria disease, he suggested. The powerhouse of the cell. That's how many people know mitochondria. Cells are the parts of the cells that turn sugars and fats and proteins that we eat into forms of chemical energy that the body can use to carry on living. That's mitochondria. Every living thing is made of cells, tiny compartments contained by a membrane. Cells are the smallest things that can reproduce themselves. When we look inside cells, we see that they have smaller subcompartments known as organelles, I think that's pronounced, which perform different functions essential for the cell to live. Mitochondria are organelles found in the cells of every complex organism. They produce about 90% of the chemical energy that cells need to survive. No energy, no life. Jacob was officially diagnosed with mitochondria disease in 2013 when he was just 11. How do you explain to a young boy who had faced rejection from so many of his adolescent years that he would likely never experience adulthood, that he would probably die a slow and painful death one day at a time? While most of us experience bouts of near-death periods in our life cycle, we generally recover some or most of what we lost physically during those dark periods. For those with diseased mitochondria, paradise lost would never be regained. Jake, however, would gain something far greater than physical strength. He would develop the ability to encourage others. He would become mighty Jake. The road to mightiness is never straight or level, but instead filled with twists and turns and occasional potholes. How one reacts to the winding road of life is what this book is all about. It is how heroes are born. Jake's diagnosis did not level or straighten the road ahead, nor did life get easier. In fact, the treatment of Jake's symptoms would become almost unbearable because of the little-known medical history of how to treat this incurable disease. Each time Jake's bowels would back up and need medical treatment, whoever was on call at the hospital would go through a learning curve at Jake's expense, requiring test after test during each lengthy stay. Eventually, feed ports were added to Jake's body to bypass the need for solid foods, an attempt at reducing the pain of digesting and eliminating such foods. This procedure was only extended as a short-term fix while other options were explored, but there were no other options, and Jake remained hooked up to these feeding ports for several years, creating a recurring nightmare of emergency hospital visits caused by infection from the entry port into Jake's body. When Jake was about to turn 13 years old and become a teenager, his mother asked him what he wanted for his birthday. Expecting to hear a wish list of toys and electronic games, Jake replied, "I would like birthday cards." He was spending so much time in hospital rooms that his best friends were the nurses and aides assigned to his care. He longed for friends outside the confines of the multi-story hospitals where he spent such a big part of his life, and he enjoyed reading the comments, stories, and well wishes of the few cards he did occasionally receive. "So, how many cards would you like?" his mother asked. 400, was Jake's reply. "I would like 400 birthday cards." Just say those words caused Jake to form the smile that would become his trademark. I remember that time so vividly. Jake's mom put on social media Jake's wish for birthday cards. She didn't expect the local news channels to pick up on it, gaining more than just friends and family attention. However, a local news reporter called to see if he could do a story on Jake and to raise awareness about autism. What the reporter came away with was far more exclusive and revealing than he ever expected. This was a story about a young boy robbed of a normal childhood and exposed to daily, weekly, and monthly treatments for his other disease, which would ultimately take his life. And the kid couldn't stop smiling. That picture of a young boy smiling in the face of certain death went viral, and soon hundreds of birthday cards addressed to Jacob Priestley, the boy who just wanted birthday cards, began arriving. The local post office called and asked what was going on. They had received more mail for one individual than the entire morning's delivery for the town. Jake received over 2,000 birthday cards that year, mostly from locals, first responders, and schools. It was amazing. Jake's mom and dad were overwhelmed with the love and support from the community and brought over post office crates full of letters to open and read. It was one of the most spiritual experiences of my life as I read story after story of others who shared Jake's trial and added words of encouragement and stories of their own. We lasted one night until after 2 a.m., completely exhausted from the emotional outpouring for our grandson. Jake took stacks of birthday cards with him to the next hospital visit and the next, sharing them with doctors and nurses alike. It kept him preoccupied with something other than the increased emergency visits to the ER and more extended stays at the hospital due to a spike in temperature or other infection symptoms. Early in the diagnosis of the disease, we almost lost Jake due to an infection that could not be controlled. It almost took his life because we had waited too long before bringing him in for antibiotics and other fluids. So every time after that, even the slightest fever was a reason to bring him in. Diseased mitochondria disarms the body's normal function to fight invading organisms. So another part of Jake's life was spent avoiding the public. Jake had no real friends his age other than online or in written form. His world revolved around health professionals and his immediate family. The birthday cards added a welcomed new dimension to Jake's life. Like every trial, conditions either get better and the sun shines again, or they take another turn, delivering another punch or two. In Jake's case, it would be the latter. It was near Christmas 2016, and we were all worried that Jake would have to spend Christmas in the hospital fighting another bout of infections, which would not go away for him to be released. Periods between home and hospital stays were becoming shorter, forcing Jake's caregivers to arrive at a grim decision. They had to remove Jake's feeding tubes and let nature take its course. A second bit of news trumped the decision to remove Jake's only means of receiving life-sustaining nourishment. Jake had a large blood clot in his chest, and because of Jake's fragile condition, no doctor would operate. They were sending our Jacob home to die. In writing this book, it has been my sincere effort to help prepare you for the next trial in your life. Left to our own responses, most will react instinctively, in anger mode, striking out without purpose, control, or plan. Our minds shut down, focused only on the bitter pill of disappointment and pain, leaving the trial's outcome to chance and more often to failure. But remember the 5 P's discussed in this book? Proper preparation prepares poor performance. This acronym encourages us to condition ourselves for opposition and trial before it comes. The first activity of preparation is to understand the purpose of trial as a schoolmaster and not as a taskmaster handing out punishment. Understanding that trial has purpose and conditioning ourselves to look for the purpose with a tender and humble heart is significant in winning through trial. I can still remember sitting in Jake's hospital room, the only sound being the heart monitor hooked up to Jake, the air in the room being sucked out with the sobering news that Jake was coming home for Christmas, but it may be his last. A family prayer was offered, asking the Lord for a miracle, or at least a tender mercy. The hope for miracle came the next day after a sleepless night. A surgeon had come forward and said he would operate on Jake to remove the blood clot in his chest. Our prayer was answered, at least in this one instance. It would not be the blood clot that claimed victory over Jake. That afternoon, Jake's family gathered around his hospital bed, filling the room with nervous laughter as we in the Malone zone are wont to do when the beating of our hearts exposes our soft shell, the attending physician's words still resonating in our memory. He may not survive the surgery, but Jake earned his place in the ring of bravery with his own declaration after the doctor had finished with his sober explanation of the seriousness of the operation, when he said to everyone's surprise, "Do I get to ride in an ambulance?" The wait for Jake's ambulance ride was the most agonizing clock-watching time I had ever spent. The silence broken only occasionally to share and laugh at something found on one of our devices, our hearts and eyes riveted upon the partially closed door to Jake's room, and then to the clock as minutes turned into hours with no arrival of the ambulance. I did not want to be the one to show my lack of faith, but I heard a voice whisper anyway, "Something's wrong." My shaky declaration would prove prophetic as the doorway filled with 2 figures clad in white, both attending doctors, followed by a third, Jake's nurse for the morning. The words strength and numbers came to my mind. How many doctors and nurses does it take to announce the arrival of an ambulance? I asked myself. The answer to my attempt at self-humor came instantly from the older doctor. The surgeon who had agreed to perform the surgery this morning backed out. He says the chances are too high that Jake would not survive the surgery. He is sorry. It was as if a bomb had been detonated in the room as the implications of the doctor's words hung in the air before exploding. "What now?" Jake's mom breathed out, already knowing the answer. "Take him home, Mrs. Priestley. Feed him. Make him comfortable. Enjoy your time with him. Because it won't take long for him to die." I filled in the rest of the unspoken message myself. "How will he eat with the feeding tubes removed?" I asked, searching for further confirmation of Jake's death sentence. He had not tasted solid food for years, choosing to stay home when family gatherings filled the air with foreign smells that brought back memories and unfulfilled pangs of hunger, unable to be satisfied. Can you imagine that? Was he now to start eating as if merely breaking an extended fast? When the men in white looked at one another as if to gauge which one would break the news, I already had my answer and saved them the unpleasant task of answering my question. "He won't," I said softly to my daughter, who had begun to sob, tears hidden for days, weeks, months, now flowing freely over their banks, no longer able to contain them. "There is no physical reason why Jake cannot eat enough to sustain himself," one of the white coats broke in. "Let him eat what he wants, a little at a time." And then they all disappeared down the hallway to attend to other patients. Their job done here. Frankly, there was nothing to do but go home and wait. And for the first time in this exhaustive journey, we began planning a funeral. Thoughts of a blood clot time bomb playing out in everyone's mind. At least Jake and his family got to come home for Christmas, a gift from God for sure. And a beautiful Christmas it was. Every thought turned more to Christ than ever, and to Jake. It was during this bleak period that Jake's bishop suggested that Jake arrange for a patriarchal blessing, a spiritual blessing administered by a humble man called by revelation and priesthood authority to serve as a patriarch within the boundaries of the stake, the geographical area of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, in which he resides, serving those individuals and families who lived therein. Patriarchal blessings are usually scheduled during a person's middle to later teenage years, but Jake's bishop felt inspired to arrange for one now, not knowing if Jake would live to experience adulthood. His recommendation would be a tremendous blessing of peace to the family and further confirmation that Jake was securely bound to a loving Heavenly Father who knew of his condition very well. A patriarchal blessing is a revelation to the recipient, even a white line down the middle of the road, to protect, inspire, and motivate activity and righteousness. A patriarchal blessing literally contains chapters from your book of eternal possibilities. I say eternal, for just as life is eternal, so is a patriarchal blessing. What may not come to fulfillment in this life may occur in the next. We do not govern God's timetable. "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord." And that it was found in a wonderful article written by President Thomas S. Monson, the second counselor in the first presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and published in the Ensign magazine, November of 1986. Unlike a priesthood blessing to heal the sick, a patriarchal blessing is intended as a glimpse into the eternal realm of possibilities, not as a fixed prophecy, but as insight into your lineage and revelation into what may come to pass upon your faithfulness and obedience to continued revelation from God. Do you remember the story of the Old Testament Israelites during their trek across the wilderness to reach the Promised Land, and how God intended to prepare them to become His covenant people? Do you remember they did not heed the revelation and instruction from God, and chose instead to worship idols, complaining that God took too long to provide for their needs? They chose to overlook the mighty miracles God performed on their behalf, and therefore their generation forfeited the blessings intended for them. Such are the promised blessings received through a patriarchal blessing, conditioned upon one's choices in life and responses to God's spiritual promptings. Jake's patriarchal blessing revealed much about his spiritual life before receiving a body of flesh and bone as part of his earthly experience. He was indeed an extraordinary young man, personally acquainted with many noble and great ones who came to earth as prophets, seers, and revelators. Jake had come to earth not to become great in terms of his station in life or church callings that he may hold, but he would indeed become mighty. That special Christmas, a miracle would happen in the form of mighty Jake. He did not die. One can only imagine the terror Jake's mother felt every morning after realizing she had fallen asleep without checking almost every hour on her oldest son to be sure he was comfortable and still breathing, and then forcing herself to peer into his bedroom, preparing for the worst, only to find his body rising ever so slowly with every precious breath. Imagine the joy felt every morning as my wife or I called to check in on Jake, preparing for the worst but quickly forming a smile and reacting to his mom's words, "He is still with us." Jake lost 40 pounds over the next month, settling into a body weight of around 75 pounds. Adjusting to his new norm of life without food, we kept asking ourselves, how? How can this fragile boy continue to survive with only a few bites of whatever he asked for? Then a paragraph in Jake's patriarchal blessing came ringing clear. His mission on earth had been accomplished. A physical body had been obtained. He was now under his Heavenly Father's care. The timing of Jake's return to his heavenly home would be between Jake and his Heavenly Father. And this comforting revelation eased the stress around the Priestley household and through all the Malone zone of grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins. We all breathed a little easier, knowing God was in charge now. Our role would be to enjoy this mighty Jake for as long as possible. Instead of planning his funeral, the family started planning Jake's 14th birthday. Once again, Jake's request was only for birthday cards. So his mother went to her friends on social media asking for help planning Jake's birthday, a milestone she never expected to celebrate with her son. The response was immediate. The letter was marked with the insignia of a police shield, with letters forming Brooklyn North, NYPD. The letter said they had seen the article on the news about Jacob, the boy who just wanted birthday cards, and realized just how special this young man facing death was. And they wanted to do something special for him, so they sent out an email to the whole NYPD asking those who saw Jake's story and wanted to send in a card to send them to Brooklyn North so they could fill a box full of cards to send to Jake. But they were astonished over how many cards and letters came in and decided to do something a little more. Jake and his family had been invited to New York City at the request and expense of the fine men and women in blue of the Brooklyn North Police Department. Someone with the NYPD had been following Jake's story since the previous year and had suggested the idea of Jake's invitation, which was met with enthusiastic approval. An itinerary for the week in NYPD was sent, full of sightseeing and public appearances. The more the word got out about Jake's story, the more requests for him to visit hospitals, schools, and dedications. The list grew so long that Jake's host had to begin turning down requests. Jake's parents were stunned as they tried to find a catch to the invitation. Plane tickets and hotel accommodations would be provided, as well as a tour of NYC, New York City, by Jake's entourage of both plainclothed and uniformed officers. Their suspicions satisfied, replaced by excitement and joy for their son, the Priestleys had no idea of what lay ahead of them in response to birthday cards for their son. The NYPD experience was only the tip of the iceberg of surprises. "Mom, it's Fox News," came the excited announcement from Jacob's younger brother, Tyler. "They want to do a story about Jake." The reporter from Fox News arrived shortly after the phone call, asking for an interview with Jake and his family, which meant Protector Grandad Malone would be on hand to ensure the reporter's intent was indeed about Jake's request for birthday cards and not something else. Thankfully, it turned into a wonderful experience for all. Jake flashed his famous smile and responded to questions like any 14-year-old kid with autism would do, capturing the hearts of viewers and affiliates alike. Soon, the Phoenix Suns and Mercury professional men's and women's basketball teams were behind Jake's wish, sending their respective mascots to the Priestley home with fun antics accompanied by autographed basketballs, hats, shirts, and other fun gifts for Jake. It was sad to see them go, walking down the street like a parade at Disneyland for all the neighbors to see. That year, social media's Adventures with Mighty Jake was born. Cards and letters came pouring in so fast that the post office dedicated a bin just for the kid who only wished for birthday cards, and more than once had to call Jake's mom to ask her to please come and pick up hundreds of cards, letters, and packages addressed to Mighty Jake. I have to tell you that was so amazing. We had to take our car along with theirs to transport all the cards that came. Jake's trip to New York City was nothing but first class all the way. After a long flight from Phoenix, a bite or two of New York pizza was enough for Jake, followed by an early morning call to visit an inner city school assembly at which Jake was treated like a rock star. Jake was introduced to the mayor of Brooklyn North, who proclaimed Mighty Jake Day, followed by a modified tour of the Empire State Building. Who wouldn't want to be carried, wheelchair and all, by Brooklyn's finest? A close and personal view of Lady Liberty, the 9/11 Museum, Times Square, and even a Broadway show with dinner afterward. Jake's adventure, although a once-in-a-lifetime event for anyone, would prove exhausting. A reminder of the progressive terminal illness that lay beneath the winning smile. While New York wanted more of Mighty Jake, they only had a taste of the fighting spirit of this young man possessed. But the officers assigned to Jake's detail got to see firsthand what this boy, a mere child in terms of age, endured every day of his life, and their respect and admiration turned into a fast friendship long after the visit had ended, continuing even to present day. Well, this was written in 2023, but it still continues even today as I'm reading this. Although Jake's body would give out after a few hours of activity each day, he still gave his all to those who had been so gracious, caring, and kind in providing this opportunity for Jake to see and experience New York. From appearing live on a morning radio talk show to being the center of attention in a school assembly that same afternoon, while Jacob's dad gave an encouraging talk to the youth, as he does weekly back home, where he is known as Coach Tom to young boys on his baseball team, Jake gave all he could. Back home in Arizona, Jake's mail bin was overflowing with literally thousands of birthday cards for this brave young man who had inspired so many with his infectious smile despite his circumstances. Needless to say, Jake's wish for hundreds of birthday cards had exceeded his wildest dreams, as he spent most of his birthday waking hours in bed, surrounded by hundreds of yet unopened cards, interrupted by occasional texts to Jake from his many New York fans. I cannot mention in this writing the many, and I do mean many, kindnesses of complete strangers to Jake and his family for fear of missing someone. People went out of their way to reach out to this boy with no hope of experiencing a normal childhood and blessed his life with their words, deeds, and gifts. It was such truly a miracle, resulting in happy distractions from the daily reminder of a debilitating and progressively fatal disease. After such a marvelous birthday experience, one might think the end of Jake's journey would surely come to pass. Not so in Jake's case, even though he could not physically show his uplift. uh, from his birthday events and attention. I remember going over and just see, he was still smiling. I mean, he showed it in other ways, though, in noticeable ways. He did not succumb. He did not become depressed. He did not cry because he couldn't eat the birthday cake or play outside and experience what it was like to ride a skateboard. He smiled. He slept. He chatted with his new police friends in New York on social media. He played video games. And yes, he continued the best he could with his online studies, his parents trying to provide as much normality to Jake's life as possible. But Jake's life was anything but ordinary. I mean, who gets invited to a SWAT demonstration in a private facility filled with the latest and greatest crime fighting equipment? Who gets to watch man against beast training and operate a remote controlled surveillance device used to check out hostile environments? Mighty Jake, that's who. And many thanks to the Phoenix, Arizona SWAT team for this experience that even Granddad was invited to attend. I mean, who has the Phoenix Suns gorilla bouncing an autographed basketball down the street to Jake's house for a personal visit? When was the last time you saw a group of motorcyclists cruising a neighborhood on their way to deliver signed birthday cards to a hero of theirs? And the list goes on as Jake's mightiness gained notoriety and captured the heart of America. Ports abroad from Australia to Canada and beyond, it soon became apparent that this was to be Jacob Priestley's mission in life, to bring encouragement and blessings of hope to the afflicted and downtrodden, the well and the sick, the rich and the poor. If Jake can go through this life with a smile, knowing his would likely end sooner than expected, then what about me? What excuse do I have for not becoming all that I can be with what I have to work with? Well, Jake's story did not end his 14th year, nor his 15th, again defying medical science. His 15th birthday was celebrated as Grand Marshal of the NYPD Walk and Run, a 5K and a 10K run to draw awareness to unique diseases such as autism, mitochondria, and other rare diseases. Held in Brooklyn, New York, USA, called upon to assist a Catholic priest in pronouncing a blessing at the start of the race, and shook hands with the mayor of Brooklyn, New York, as he took his place at the front of the parade of which he would lead as Grand Marshal. Oh, Jake accepted invitations to visit schools and hospitals. In one school, he would participate in Art Day, beaming with the others surrounding him at his colorful creations. In another, he just sat in his wheelchair, listening to musical chorales. But on this second visit to New York, his friends noticed something different about their hero. He often tired and took longer to recover. The disease was taking its toll on the body of this mighty warrior, and there was nothing he could do but endure. Jake loves Disneyland, so his parents purchased a season pass so his mom could drive him over to LA every few months to give Jake a pause from his reality and enjoy a bit of fantasy. But one need only to look at his social media photos to see the change in Jake. Subtle, but unmistakable nonetheless. His big smile is slower to peak, and his endurance is limited to maybe an hour or two at the most at Disneyland, but before he is found asleep in his wheelchair, covered with a blanket from head to toe, his mom left to herself, fearing the worst for her son as this terrible disease continued to advance. Well, let's pause there, my good friends. I thought about not splitting this chapter into two because Jake's story is told throughout the entire chapter. But there is so much to gain from listening to his story, even a portion of it, and then pondering over how you feel about the trial that you're currently going through. Jake's wishes and prayers with all his heart are that his story will inspire you to become mighty and to be a hero to someone you love through forgiveness, perhaps, through charity, kindness, gentleness, and unconditional love. Those are mighty, Christ-like attributes that each of us should be striving for. And if Jake were here right now, he would say to each of you, if I can do it, so can you. Be mighty. Thank you for listening to my book reading and commentary podcast of my book, Winning Through Trial. If you feel you're finding value in my experiences with trial, I would love for you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Charles P. Malone Podcasts, because we are just getting started. Each new book I write will be featured in this channel as a free audio as well as videos of my speaking engagements, and portions of new books will be highlighted on this channel before they are published, so you get first notice of what's coming up next in the writing life of Charles P. Malone. And please share both books of trial with anyone struggling with trial right now, especially book one, The Sweetness of Trial, found on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Just search for the book title and you can share the free audio with your friends and family. And of course, if you would like a paperback copy of any of my books, you can find my author page on amazon.com/books just by searching in the book section under Charles P. Malone. Now, stay tuned for episode 14, chapter 7b, titled Be Mighty, the Story of Mighty Jake. And we will begin on page 39. Until then, until we meet again, please stay mighty. Please endure your trial. Please do more than enduring your trial.